Actually bought the aeroplane and used them as trainers. So that's a pretty impressive thing because the Air Force still use these. It's an excellent machine indeed. That shiny silver pole sticking out the nose there is what they call the pitot tube, P-I-T-O-T. There's a tiny little hole at the very front end of that. You can just barely make it out. That's where the air goes in. And these things are on every aeroplane. It was invented by a Frenchman in World War I and named after him. Anyway, that's your airspeed indicator. And of course, when you get up to supersonic speed, instead of miles per hour or knots per hour, we use Mach numbers. And the speed of sound at sea level is 670 and it's 760 at high altitude because of the difference in temperatures and pressures. So each machine has some. Some of them are two or three. And the F-117 has 5, one for each of the computers that fly the aeroplane. One of it is the Huey, H-U-E-Y. That was a major gunship in the Vietnam War. The big one, which is known as the Flying Banana because of its funny shape, the Piasaki helicopter, that could carry about 22 medevac or 20 fully armed troops. You'd see quite a lot of servers there. And the final one just is no sneaking around the corner there is the Cobra. They're still in use, but the Marines use one with 2 engines instead of the single one like that one has. The one on the right is the MiG-15, going towards your left, the MiG-17, the MiG-19, 21, and 23, which we can see from this angle. The 15 was the one we fought against in the Korean War. That happens to be the 2-seat trainer version, but the single-seater, we had a kill ratio of 10 to 1. 10 MiGs for every one that we lost. The 17 and 19 and 21 were used in the Cold War period in Europe mainly. Pretty effective little airplanes, mainly used by the satellite countries of Russia at that time. It didn't carry much in the way of bombs. It only carried about 4,000 pounds of Berlin. And the bomber I flew, we carried 14,000 pounds. And the Lancaster carried the same, but if we took the bomb doors off, we could carry one 22,000 pound bomb. And that would penetrate 100 feet of concrete. And the next aircraft that could carry one 22,000 pound bomb was the B-36, and that was 20 years later, and it had 10 engines to do it. So we were fairly far advanced at that time in Germany. The Cold War, there's still a lot of these around down in Syria and that neck of the woods. It was the first variable swept wing aircraft, and they copied that from our FB-111 when they shot them down over Vietnam. You notice the undercarriage is pretty heavy. It's designed to take off and land from unprepared airfields. We did see a lot of service in the Afghanistan campaign when they were up there back in the 70s. And the one with the green snoot in the nose is the MiG-21, and that was the standard fighter in NATO during the Cold War era against us. So I'll talk more about that one later. On the left, the one with Vermont on the tail, started off like in the Royal Air Force, known as the Canberra Jet Bomber. It was in the mid-50s, and in those days it could get up around 55,000 feet. And the average fighter in those days was good for about 40,000 feet. So they was flown in competition against some American stuff off of Edwards, won the competition. They built 400 of them under license, and it was the first plane to drop a bomb in North Vietnam. NASA still have 2 of them. They extended the wingspan 20 feet, the Air Force did, and they were using it to back up the U-2 and the Blackbird over North Vietnam for reconnaissance. And NASA used them now for sampling air pollution at Albatross. They were built by Grumman. And all flying boats have the wing as high as you can get it on top of the fuselage. And the reason for that's quite basic. If the wing was in the middle like it is in the B-29, then the propellers would hit the water. So when you see pictures of flying boats, they all have the same setup. You also see birds flying in and out of our airplanes, and you see these little spikes on the props and on the wings and so on. That's to keep them from sitting there and pooping all over it, because it's tough to keep them clean. But we've got some tough birds around here that sit on the spikes. You can see in the propellers there's bird droppings on them. Coast Guard now use helicopters. It's flying in the early 40s, or early 50s rather. As I mentioned, they could stay up for about an hour, maybe an hour and a half, with little wing tanks on them. So flight refueling was pioneered off the base here back in the 30s. And as a result of that, the Air Force had Boeing change this to a tanker aircraft. Now that little bubble at the back end is where the boom operator sat, and he could lower that big arm down about 30 degrees. There's a pipe inside to stick out another 18 feet. That would plug into the jet, and that way they could transfer fuel. But this was a slow airplane, and it couldn't get up very high, about 24,000 feet, so it had to go into a gentle dive so the jets didn't fall out of the sky. So it worked out pretty well, but obviously we needed a jet tanker, and if you look across to the far side of the field there, by the hangars, there's a whole bunch of them. And these are C-135s, and we have one of our own, you'll see in a few minutes, by supersonic straight and level. Before that, they had the old F-86, the Saberjet, the one we used in Korea. A very effective fighter, but it had to get to 40,000, put on full power, and dive towards Mother Earth to punch its way through the sandbag. All of these Century series fighters can do it straight and level. This one carried 420mm cannon. You can see the gun ports under the nose there, and it could also carry a couple of heavy bombs, a couple of 1,000-pounders under the wings. Neat little airplane, used as a fighter bomber in Vietnam. And that was the one that was designed to meet the nuclear threat coming over the North Pole and down through Canada. It didn't carry guns, they carried missiles and rockets. And the two rockets that they carried, Genie rockets, each one carried a nuclear bomb, a 1.5 kiloton, which the theory was with one shot would blow 10 or 20 Russian B-29s out of the sky. Fortunately, the Cold War stayed cold and fire at anger. Going down the line, the one with the yellow stripe on the tail is the F-102, the Dagger. That's a delta wing aircraft. It doesn't really have a tail. It's rather like the wing on the fin at the back end there, the rudder. It's a triangular shape, and the wings are the same, stuck one on either side of the fuselage. This is our first single-seat all-weather radar intercept fighter, and that black thing on the nose is the radar dish in there. And the canopy is a rather pointy thing, so when the pilot's got his bone dome on, there's not too much room to move around there. Plus he's got a radar scope in front of him for firing the missiles. And coming in to land at night in that thing, the nose is pointing about 30 degrees upwards. And in bad weather at night, getting that thing on the ground must have been quite a handful. We took the liberty of printing President Bush's name on the side because that's the type of aircraft he flew when he was in the Guard. Aircraft there, the Starfighter. They built 2,500 of them, half of them up in Canada. They're flown by the Canadians, the Americans, and also the German Luftwaffe during the Cold War. The Americans ones had nuclear capability delivery for tactical weapons. It was a Mach 2 fighter, another 1,500 mile an hour. A neat little airplane. And the big one was HI up on the tail. There's two of them, the other one's outside the fence, as you can see as you came in. That was the Thunder Chief, known as the Thud, because when you cut the power on that thing, it stayed on the ground. It didn't bounce at all. We built 800 of them, and we had 380 shot down in Vietnam. That's on the tail. It's the A-7, A for attack aircraft. This used to be flown by the Navy. It's known as the F-8 Crusader. It was a well-proven tactical weapon system, so the Air Force bought a couple of hundred of them and they used them in Vietnam. Just beyond it, the plane with a big propeller on it is a naval aircraft called the Sky Raider. These were used in Korea during that war, and a very effective one indeed. What's interesting is 1,000 pounds of ordnance. That's almost 5 times the load of a B-17 with just one engine. And in Vietnam, we used it to protect our pilots and crews when they were shot down, because they could loiter over the area with all that weaponry on board and protect the guys till the helicopters would get there to pick them up. And the other little one we'll see better when it goes on the other side. But from this angle, that plane with the tailplane sticking upwards at the funny angle was the FB-111, our Aardvark as they called it. That was our first variable swept wing fighter aircraft. It's actually a fighter bomber, did both roles. It was also unique, it carried what they call terrain following radar. So if it was flying over the field here towards the mountains there at 200 feet, the radar would fly the plane up over the top of the mountains down the other side. These guys are doing this at night. Oddly enough, it had the best survivability record of any fighter aircraft in the Vietnam War. And then the big silver and white plane here is our B-47. This was the first strategic jet bomber that we had. Never did drop a bomb in anger, but it was used in a movie, Strategic Air Command with Jimmy Stewart. And back in the museum, we have a cutaway section of the whole nose of the aircraft that was used in the movie. The two pilots could eject upwards, and the navigator's seat would shoot them downwards so they didn't hit each other on the way out.
Michelle, do you have a copy?
Oh, sorry. The theory was that when you dropped your nuclear bomb and the flash went off, you'd be banking away and the white would reflect the heat and hopefully give the crew some protection. All good in theory. It was a good bomber. In its early days it was capable of getting up to around about 45,000 feet, which is not too bad considering the type of aircraft it was at that time. I chased one night over Scotland when I was on night fighters, and we got up around 40,000 feet and we were falling out of the sky. I couldn't even get up there. But it sure showed up big on my radar set with a big white blip. Very impressive indeed. Our black bomber here is the B-52. It's the biggest one we have, and they're still in service. This is the D model. It had a little gun turret down at the back end, but the current one is the G model that will be running for another 25 years. Right now the grandsons of the original pilots are flying them, and the great-grandsons will be able to do it as well because they're going to be around for another 20-odd years. The length of the plane is 158 feet, and the first flight of the Wright brothers, when they first flew, they only flew 120 feet. So if they started at the nose, they wouldn't have reached the tail. So it sort of puts it all in perspective. This could carry 30 tons of bombs. It's a very impressive airplane indeed. It could also carry that drone just see to the left of it there near the tail. That's an unmanned spy plane. I'll talk about that later on, but this could carry that as well. The wing off. Now next time you fly, if you look out, you'll see the wing going up and down. That's quite normal. If it falls off, of course, you should tell somebody, but the pilot can't quite see it at the wing tip there from where he sits. It's carried a crew of 5. 2 pilots, 2 navigators, and a weapons system operator. Very impressive airplane indeed. The runway here is 12,000 feet. On the tail is the A9, A for attack. It was built by Northrop, and it flew in competition up at Edwards against the A10, built by Republic. And it actually won the competition, but the politicians got in with a Fort Bell payoff, and the Republic got the contract. That's the one we call the Warthog. Still a good airplane, but this one is the one that the Russians copied, and that's the type that they use for ground attack. Our C-135 here, similar to the ones on the far side of the field, and if you can visualize a whole row of little windows like that one on the side, then you'd have a 707 airliner. The newer ones are slightly bigger engines, more powerful, more fuel efficient. They're also a lot quieter, and they're green engines. These used to use water injection to give them extra thrust for takeoff, so they did pollute a little bit on the ground. And we have a small arm of communication thing, which is a lot of these in civilian hands. Aero commandos, a bit noisy, but they could carry about 6 or 8 people, and quite a few are sort of private company-owned type things as well. And the big aeroplane with the twin booms is the C-119, the Fairchild Packet. This was used in the movie Flight of the Phoenix. The second one, the first one was made with Jimmy Stewart, the second one with, not Chad Everett, I always get the names mixed up, Dennis Quaid. The aircraft, when it lands, you can see the split top to bottom on the back end of the aeroplane. And if you look carefully, there's 2 little hinges to the right of the door. And that would open up like a big clamshell. Then you had to lay down 2 little ramps to run your guns and jeeps in and out. If you were dropping paratroopers in the air, then that would be closed. And they'd have these little doors that could jump out side by side. So that way they'd be closer on the ground as a fighting unit when they got down there. Kind of neat. They were flying as a little civil airliner back in the 30s. And when a pilot becomes a pilot, he's been flying single-engine aircraft. This was his next chance to learn to fly with 2 engines. And they built about 1,500 of them, and that's how the guys learned to do that. Then they'd graduate from this to a bigger twin engine, like a B-25 or something, or he got to B-17 or B-24. And we still basically use the same technique for training today. Behind it there is a C-47, the famous Dakota. It had all sorts of neat names that just about ever knew it as the Dakota in Europe during the war. Used for dropping paratroopers mainly, or could tow a glider or drop supplies, and they used them flying over the hump into China to supply the B-29s. This particular one belonged to Governor Pat Brown, Jerry Brown's father, when he was the governor of our state. Kind of a neat aircraft. then when you put, say, bigger engines on, it becomes the B model, then you change something else, it becomes the C model, and you work your way down through the alphabet. Of course, if you get all the way down to the Z model, it was a pretty crummy aeroplane to begin with, so you should have junked it. But this one here started off life as a glider. And gliders went out of fashion at the end of World War II, even before that, actually. Anyway, they liked the fact that the floor drops down like it does on our C-17, so they stuck an engine on it, but the wings were never designed to carry fuel tanks, so they had to put fuel tank behind the engine, which always spooky, but it seemed to work. And this is the K model with the extra jet engines on it. And this was used extensively in Vietnam, mainly for dropping Agent Orange for defoliation. It was also the first aircraft to land in McMurdo Sound down in the Antarctic, where it's pretty darn cold and very, very dry. And it's so darn cold they didn't dare switch the engine off, otherwise the oil would have frozen. They tested it up in Iceland by fitting skis under the wheels, and it worked pretty well. It's kind of a neat little trick. On the left, the Lockheed Lodestars, we had them in the RAF, they weren't particularly good. We sent 12 to bomb effect in Holland, and they all got shot down. So we changed that modus operandi big time. This we switched it into a little it's going to be our airliner. They used to